Welcome back. I'm Holly, a fiber artist and your host. I've been working on a project to recreate an 18th century American flag. In the previous episode, I wove all the cloth that would be necessary to make the flag, the wool bunting for the stripes and the blue field, and the linen for the stars. The linen will stay as it is, but I'm going to need to dye some of the wool red and some blue. Now, at the time that the flag was made, the original flag, almost certainly they would have been dyeing entire pieces of cloth and then cutting out what they needed from those pieces. Since I only wove enough cloth for one flag, I'm going to be cutting up my fabric first into sections and dyeing those sections.
When I cut my fabric, I want to make sure I have a nice straight line. So instead of just coming in with scissors or a rotary cutter, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull one thread. So I'll pull a thread all along the width of the fabric. That gives me a space and a straight line along with the weave on which I'll cut. And I'm going to pick up a thread and just tease that thread out all along the length of the fabric. So hopefully you can see how that pulled thread has left a space right here. And then I can come in with my scissors and carefully cut right down that space. And this is how I will separate all the pieces for dyeing.
Now that I have the pieces ready, you might be wondering, how am I going to achieve those brilliant colors we see on the American flag? If you remember your chemistry history, synthetic dyes were not invented until the mid-1800s, when the 18-year-old William Henry Perkins chemically synthesized mauvine purple from coal tar. Before this time, all dyes were products that were already present in plants, animals, lichen, and fungi. To obtain red at the time when the Mooney flag was made, dyers would have likely used either madder or cochineal, both of which were available in the colonies at the time. Madder is the powdered root of a plant, which was obtained from England and could also be grown in America. Cochineal is obtained from a South American insect that, when dried and ground, produces a red dye. At that time, cochineal was only farmed in South America, almost exclusively in Oaxaca by indigenous producers. To obtain the dye in the colonies, it was shipped from South America to Spain, then England, and finally to the colonies. There is a book published in the year 1800 called The Country Dyer's Assistant, in which are recipes for a large variety of natural dyes, including dyeing crimson with cochineal. Being a straightforward recipe with ingredients I could readily obtain, I opted to use this recipe for dyeing my cloth red. I got the cochineal already extracted from the insects. Testing a small sample of my fabric showed that it would indeed give me the red that I wanted, so I proceeded with my whole piece of cloth. Here's the recipe I followed to get this color on my cloth. I also will post it in the show notes below after the list of references, if anyone out there wants to try this with their wool. This dye protocol required a pre-treatment of the wool called a mordant. A mordant is a substance that helps bind the dye to the cloth permanently. I followed the mordant step, made up my dye bath, and then it was time to dye the cloth.
So our cloth has been soaking in the cochineal dye bath for an hour, and I'm going to pull it out. It's very hot still, so I'm going to use tongs. And what you'll see is the dye bath is lighter. Now, it's not as light as it was when I did my sample, but look at the color we've gotten on that cloth. Still, I would like it a little darker, so I'm going to add more cochineal to this same bath, stir it around, and then add my cloth back in for another hour.
To achieve the blue field, I dyed the wool with indigo. Indigo is a chemical of plant origin and can be found in a variety of plants. Some, like Indigofera genus, which is in the legume family, and others like Isatis tinctoria, commonly known as wove, which is in the brassica family. Indigo, the English name for the dye and the color it produces, comes from the Greek indikon, meaning from India. And while it seems that the Greeks got their indigo from India, the extraction of indigo from plants and its use in dyeing appears to have developed independently in different regions around the world. There are archaeological examples of indigo-dyed cotton from Peru dating to around 6,000 years ago. Indigo was also used to dye linen in Egypt around 4,000 years ago, and its use in China and India is also thought to be thousands of years old. And places like the Kofar Mata dye pits and Kano City, northern Nigeria, have been used for indigo dyeing for more than 600 years, suggesting that the knowledge and use of indigo there is much older. Once extracted from the plant, indigo is dried for storage and distribution. The dried indigo has to be ground back into a powder before putting it in a solution that reduces the indigo to a state in which it would be liquid soluble and stick to the fabric. Recipes from the 18th century suggest grinding the indigo into a paste using stale urine before putting it into a fermentation vat. I didn't need to be that authentic, as I can get already ground indigo and use it in a dye bath of 1 part natural indigo powder, 2 parts calcium hydroxide, and 3 parts fructose. No urine needed.
So here we have the indigo vat, and what I'm going to try to show you is that the liquid that dyes the indigo, the bath itself, is not blue, but this yellowy amber color. And what will happen is we'll dip the cloth in, the indigo in that state will stick to the cloth. When we pull it out, the oxygen will change the chemical composition of the indigo, oxidize it, and turn it blue. So we're going to dip our fabric, our soaked fabric, into the bath for 60 seconds. So in it goes. Okay, and we'll pull that out. And you see it comes out this green color. But as it reacts with the oxygen, it's going to start turning blue. And we're going to leave that, hang that up, let that oxidize, and then we'll probably give it 3 or 4 more dips to get a really deep, dark navy blue.
In the 18th century, there were professional dyers who routinely put ads in newspapers, like this one from the Providence Gazette in 1774, saying his shop would dye any color in cloth or yarn, and this one from the Pennsylvania Gazette from 1766, which says that Bolton and Scotland, at the sign of the Blue Hand, scours and dyes all sorts of silk and woolen goods. From their choice of sign, I can almost guarantee that at least one of their specialties was dyeing with indigo. Some families had indigo dye vats at home, evidenced by diary entries of people who were not dyers by profession buying indigo from local merchants. Family urine vats are also mentioned in The Country Dyer's Assistant. Others would have brought their cloth to the professional dyers, as did Matthew Patent, the head of a New Hampshire farming and weaving family. In May 1776, he brought a gown and 26 yards of cloth to the clothiers to be dyed and dressed, and the same day bought 4 pounds worth of goods, including a Declaration for Independence. Obtaining indigo from the plant in which it is produced is a lengthy and labor-intensive process. The indigo-containing plant is harvested, soaked in water in huge vats, which extracted the pigment. In the 18th century, countries like England, France, and Spain used the plantation system in their colonized lands and human exploitation to produce this valuable product. England's American colonies, specifically South Carolina, were also involved in indigo production using the labor of enslaved people on plantations. You can see from the shipping records of 1756 that over 26,000 pounds of indigo were shipped to London from Carolina. And indigo from South Carolina was also shipped up to the northern colonies, as evidenced by this ad from the New London Gazette in 1769, which advertises choice Indian corn and indigo, which was just imported from Charlestown, South Carolina. Many of these enslaved people on indigo plantations were kidnapped from Africa as part of the slave trade of the time and sold into generations-long servitude, or they were descendants of those individuals. What I hadn't realized until doing research for this project was that Native Americans were also being enslaved at this time. I think it is important to acknowledge the unpaid, forced labor of the enslaved individuals. And when thinking of the history of this country, I hope to hold both truths, that the success and growth of the early United States was dependent upon their work, and that their labor was made under deplorable conditions and without consent. So, here we have it, all the fabric I need to make my flag. Nothing left to do now but sew it together. See you in the next episode where this flag finally comes together.